And what I like to talk about today is some of the decisions you make. So think about the decisions you make. Why am I listening to Gerard? What am I going to eat? What am I going to watch TV? But what I like to focus on today are those decisions that are just a little bit more difficult to make. And I'm talking about things such as what vehicle should I buy, or should I go ahead and take that job overseas? And the framework that I'm going to be discussing today is about making better decisions. Because somewhere along the line, when you make these rough or tough decisions, down the road, it's going to, I have a framework that's broken up into 5 parts today because of the time allowance. I'm only going to hit sections 1 and 2 and 4. Typically, this framework takes about a day to do. I do this for companies, a day and a half if it's a larger audience. But I believe strongly by reviewing this number 2, sections 1, 2, and 4, you'll have enough information to make better decisions immediately, starting today. So today's outline is how do we make decisions, why we make bad decisions, and I tell you, I wrote this book because of all the bad decisions I made in my life, and how to make better decisions. Okay, so how do you make decisions? Think for a moment. How do you make decisions? Do you roll the dice, flip a coin? Do you have some kind of process when you're talking about some difficult decisions? Well, there's various ways we make decisions. We have needs, wants, emotions. We have what's called cognitive control, value-based decisions, system 1 and 2 thinking, and we use heuristics. But for today's webinar, I want to focus on needs, wants, and emotions, which I call your trifecta influencers. And also I want to focus on system 1 and 2 thinking. And these systems 1 and 2 thinking is going to help us in our decision-making process. So when I talk about the trifecta influencers, what exactly am I talking about? Well, part of the trifecta influencers is what we call needs. Needs is something very basic. You need water to survive. You need food to live. You need shelter. These are basic needs that you must have in order to survive. But we also have what's called wants. Now, wants are a little bit different than needs. Want is something that you would like to have, but not necessarily need to have. So a good example would be you have to have a car, or you need transportation to get from point A to point B every day and to get around town. Now, what you want is maybe a Lamborghini, Ferrari, but all you really need is a reliable and effective car to get you from point A to point B. So that's a little bit of the difference between a want and a need. A want is something that you would like to have. It's not the most efficient way to get around, versus a need is something that you absolutely have to have. And sometimes you could want a want simply because there's really no reason. You want to reward yourself and buy a expensive stereo, or you want to buy a new computer and you don't need one, but you want to reward yourself. Now, one of the things that we do is, how do we get there? Well, it's your emotions is what drives your wants. Your emotions, the way you feel, the way you think, is what's driving your wants. And an example here is, let's say I want to look sexy, so I buy designer clothes. And here again, my emotions are creating my wants. I want to be able to dunk the basketball halfway through the mid-court, so I buy these logo sneakers that's going to help me get there. Or I want to get noticed as I'm driving around town in this exotic car, so I get an exotic car, or I wear a dark suit because I want to feel powerful. So these are your emotions that are creating your wants, and those are the ones that we talked about earlier that you may not necessarily need to have. Does create a place for inefficiencies when it comes to wants versus needs. Now, let's talk about system 1 thinking and system 2. Now, system 1 thinking is a phrase that's been coined by Dr. Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a great read. It's a long read, but if you want to really know how people think, that's a good read. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics. So systems 1 thinking is fast, it's efficient, it's effortless, it's innate. It's things that we make, decisions we make on the fly. We really don't think about it. We just know we can make the decision. And this is important to understand, because if you have to make a difficult decision, you don't want to be using system 1 thinking. A good example of system 1 thinking would be maybe, what's 1 plus 1? 2, right? Now, hopefully most of us got that answer. I used my calculator and still got the wrong answer, but there you go. I need help here. But that's system one thinking, something that's fast and it's efficient. There's also something called systems two thinking. Now, systems two requires a lot of energy. It requires critical thinking. It's slow, it's methodical, it's logic. There's logic behind there. And in systems two thinking, that's where you want to be when you want to make some of these difficult decisions. Now, what would be a good example of a systems two thinking? Well, earlier I said, what is 1 + 1? And everybody came up with 2. But now if I ask you, prove to me that 1 + 1 is 2. Now that requires a little bit more thought. And I believe, if you look in the internet and you do some research, I know that it's Russell and Whitehead in their Principia Mathematica, they proved 1 + 1 is 2 in about 200 plus pages. And I don't think they used any numbers. But that's what systems two thinking is. So you have systems one and you have systems two. Okay, so that's a very brief overview of how we think. We have the trifecta influencers, our needs, wants, and emotions. That's creating things the decisions that we want to make in systems one and systems two thinking, which is the way we think about making those decisions. So now the question is, well, why do we make bad decisions? Is there a reason why we might make bad decisions? Well, there is, and I'll get into them here. One of the ways we make bad decisions is we allow our emotions to get the best of us. We tend to see, okay, we feel good about this, we're looking, we want to feel great about ourselves, and we let our emotions dictate our decisions, even though it's not the most effective or the right decision. A good example would be you're going to a restaurant or you're going to a place where you have multiple restaurants that serve different kinds of foods. And one of the foods may be burgers and fries and milkshakes. And the other restaurant might be serving things such as, I guess, a grilled chicken and fish. So your emotions are telling you, hey, look, I really want to get this burger and fries. But the other side of you is saying, wait, no, you shouldn't be doing that. But then you give in the end, you give into your emotions, to your cravings, and you go with the burger and fries. There's also something called surrogate emotions. And what I mean by surrogate emotions, and by the way, this is a phrase that I came up with to describe what I'm talking about. Surrogate emotions are emotions that you prime yourself with. Prime's another way of making decisions. And priming means that you say something at the beginning to get you to think about it. It's a very powerful tool in marketing and in politics and in everything that you do. You prime someone with something, even in negotiating. So in this case, let's say that I want to get a vehicle and I prime myself with that car that I always wanted since I was a kid. We're talking about a Porsche 911. And all through my life, I've always wanted this vehicle. And now it's time for me to get a vehicle. And I know, based on how much the Porsche costs and what funds I have available, that may not be, or it really isn't a option for me. And then I start thinking, well, if I can't get the Porsche, maybe I'll get the Lexus. So what I've done is I've taken a emotion that was really high on my plate, which is a Porsche, and I stair-stepped down to something that was a little bit more satisfying, not as much as the Porsche, but just as satisfying because it is a exotic car. But then I look at my funds and I start realizing, this is going to be too much for me to do on this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just go to something that's a little bit less. So I end up going to maybe a Ford Mustang. And what I've done here is I've taken what I really wanted, which was a Porsche, was the height of my emotions. I stair-stepped down to a Lexus, which is a replacement for the Porsche. And then I did a little bit more soul searching. I got down to the Mustang. And what I've done is I've fulfilled something based on what I perceived that I wanted and replaced it with a Mustang. But in the end, really, I didn't need the Mustang. What I really needed was a reliable and effective car. But I let my emotions, my surrogate emotions, dictate to me. And your subconscious is very powerful, by the way. It's a very powerful process of your brain. And a matter of fact, I believe it's Loon in his research says that a person can decide 6 to 8 seconds before they even make the decision where they actually think about it. So those are your surrogate emotions. You go from a very top, you prime yourself, and you stair step down to something that's feasible, but in actuality, it's still not the right choice for you. And then there's the last thing, which is we don't recognize the implications. We don't think about what's taking place. We're only in the moment. We want this, we need this, and we're not thinking of the ramifications down the road. We also don't fully understand the situation. And what I mean is that you need to really investigate what you're trying to make a decision on. If you don't do that research, you may be making a decision with not all the information available to you. So you don't really understand what's going on and end up making a decision based on very limited information. And there's also the other one where you're not focused. You might come home, you say, I've got to make a decision about whether I'm going to take this job overseas or not. You turn on the game, you go from the game to your little tablet of wants and needs, you go back to the game, and you're really never focused. So these are some of the reasons why we make bad decisions. Emotions get the best of us. We have what's called surrogate emotions, and we don't understand or fully understand, recognize, or our focus. But there is a caveat to this whole process, and that is that sometimes when we make decisions, we make what's called less effective decisions. And what I mean by that is we didn't have all the information, there was a lack of data. And not because you didn't do your research, it's just because it wasn't available out there. For whatever reason, we couldn't get the information, it wasn't given to us, but yet we had to make a decision. Another reason we might make what I call a less efficient decision is there's conflicting data. A good example would be COVID-19. If you go back to the beginning, it's wear a mask and then don't wear a mask, or I get it backwards, don't wear a mask and wear a mask. So there happens to be conflicting information. Take this drug, don't take this drug. So in cases like that, it's really hard for you to make a decision when there's conflicting data out there. And then there's the last one, which we have no control of the environment. We're not prognosticators, we're not soothsayers, we're not fortune tellers. Sometimes when you make a decision, there are things that take place that you couldn't see coming, or for whatever reason, you just had no control. Economy is one, life happens, foreign governments make changes, weather. So these are all things where you have no control, but in the end, when you go through this process, you make the most effective decision. But when things like this occur, they become less efficient. Okay, so how do we make better decisions? How can we make better decisions now that we have a fundamental understanding of how we make decisions? Well, and how we make bad decisions. Well, the first thing we got to do is combat the trifecta influencers. Here's where we got to fight against the needs, wants, and emotions, and really understand which one is which. And the way to do that is what I call the three-tier philosophy. Now, the three-tier philosophy starts off with systems two thinking. This is the critical thinking. When you make these tough decisions, you've got to really be focused. You got to stay focused. You can't be thinking of other things or watching a game. And if you have to, and if you're not focused, walk away, come back later. That's okay. But part of the three-tier philosophy in making better decisions is think critically, stay in the systems two thinking. There's also something called systems thinking. And again, from a very high level view, when I talk about systems thinking is how does the decision you make affect the environment that you live in, or the whole overall process of what you're doing. A good example would be, again, going back to the vehicle. You want to get a vehicle, you look around and you like this sports car, two-seater, but you also forgot that you're wanting to get engaged in about a year. You've seen someone and you're going to want to have a family in a couple of years. And if you get a Mustang, or if you get a two-seater and you get married and you have a family, that's not going to be a very effective decision because you have a kid. Yeah, you could sell the vehicle, but then you've also lost some money on that, depending on what you do with the vehicle. But you got to think about the environment. You got to think about where you're going to be at. If you live up north and you're going to be, if you're going to be in some place where there's always snow and you're going to be in the backwoods, a sports car may not make sense to you. The last one is what I call long-term thinking. And long-term thinking, in a sense, is what is going to happen after years. or months when you've made this decision. What is your exit strategy? What are you going to do at the end of the product's life cycle or when it's time to move? And a good example, again, I'm going back to the vehicle, is if you purchase a vehicle and you don't think long term, where you're going to sell it in 3 to 4 years, and you drive it quite a bit, you don't take care of it, at the end of the 3 to 4 years, whenever you're going to trade it in or sell it, you're not going to get the most for your trade-in because you didn't take care of it, you drove many miles. Those are some of the things when it comes to long-term thinking. You got to think of an exit strategy. So these three things together, the systems two thinking, critical thinking, systems thinking, which is taking an overall view of the picture, big picture, and long-term thinking, what is your exit strategy? This is what I call the 3-tier philosophy. So that's the first thing you could do starting immediately when you're going to be making decisions, tough decisions. First, recognize your trifecta influencers, and then use this 3-tier philosophy to help you make some of those decisions. Another thing to help you through this process is what I call the P2 mode. And this is what I call the fame to my book. It's something that took time for me to really concentrate on and come up with. And the P2 mode is a cookie cutter technique to help you really stay focused and guide you through your decision-making process. So what do I mean by the P2 mode, and how is it a cookie cutter? Well, the P2 mode is an acronym, and it starts for parts. So if you're going to be looking at a decision, you want to look at the parts that make up that decision. And again, let's talk about a vehicle. What parts make up that vehicle, and what is it that you're thinking about that? The engine, the tires, the stereo, the gas mileage. The other thing of the P2 mode is the process. So hence why P2. Now, when I talk about process, what processes are you going to have to do, or I guess be able to complete in order to purchase or make that decision? And processes could be anything from, how do you complete the task to how are you going to maintain the product. The other one is the maintenance cost. So when you do something, you got to think about the maintenance costs. And maintenance is thinking a little bit on the long-term side. Well, actually it is. If you're going to purchase a vehicle, what kind of maintenance are you going to have to perform on that vehicle? Are you going to have to get the oil changed every 2,000 miles, every 5,000? Or is it going to have to be done by someone professional or not? Those are some of the maintenance costs that you're going to have to look into. But also you want to think about operational costs. Now, operational cost is a little bit different from maintenance, and I don't want to spend too much time on this as long as you think about the cost. But operational costs, if we're again thinking about a vehicle, is how much is it going to cost me to fuel up the vehicle every month? If I have to have some kind of work done on it, what kind of work, how much is it going to cost me to get that work done because of something that I did that caused it to go bad? What about my insurance? The other part of the P2 mode is what I call the disposal. This is your exit strategy. This is when you start thinking, okay, it forces you to think down the road. If I get this product, if I purchase this product, what am I going to do in the end? What am I going to do with this process or this product when it's time to get rid of it? You got to think about that, because if you're not thinking that far down the road, and again, if you don't think that far down the road, you might not make the most efficient decision. And the last one is your emotions. Now, you say, well, why am I putting emotions in here? Because as human beings, we make decisions based on emotions. Unless you're autistic, I believe that's what I read from Dr. Kalman. Unless you're autistic, emotions play a very big role in your life. Even some of the books you might read in making decisions, emotions plays a big part in it. And if you don't use your emotions to help you make that decision, you may regret the decision you've made. So that's why you put it in here. That's why I put it in here, the P2 mode. So where does that take us now? Well, let's look at a vehicle example of what we learned. Okay, so we talked about the trifecta influencers, we talked about the 3-tier philosophy, and we talked about the P2 mode. How can we use this to make decisions? Well, let me go ahead and explain. With this items that you learn, you're going to create a list of items in terms of a vehicle. And if you think about your trifecta when you're trying to create your list, and the three-tier philosophy, making sure you're concentrating, thinking short and long-term in an exit strategy, and use the P2 mode, that cookie cutter, you'll create a list of items that really embodies your overall perception or want and need of a vehicle. So let me show you how that might look in one example. Here's a list of items for a vehicle. And what I've done is I've used the P2 mode, the trifecta influencers, and the three-tier philosophy to help me put this list together. So I start with my parts product. Okay, so if I'm looking at a vehicle, I'm thinking horsepower. And that W there is a want. I really don't need horsepower, but it's something I would like to have. The color of the vehicle, the miles per gallon. The miles per gallon is an N. That little N means it's a need. And then it's I'm looking for an SUV, cost, for passenger, engine size, and engine sound. So when I use the P2 mode, I start off with the parts and say, okay, what parts of the product am I looking for? Then I go to the next one, process. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and I'm going to try to explain it a little bit more here. If you purchase something, in my case, and I'm talking about me, I don't like getting dings on my vehicle for whatever reason. I just don't like it. So when I park as far away as I can where people aren't going to hit me. Or if I valet park it, I make sure the valet takes care of it. So this is a process for me where I am spending more time and energy to do something that I don't have to. And process, unlike, it's about time and energy. How much am I going to expend? Here, getting a loan, is it going to take me a long time because I'm trying to get a car that I can't really afford? Oil changes. Remember earlier I talked about a vehicle if you want to get a Lamborghini or Porsche? Well, here for the process, if you get a Lamborghini, chances are you're not going to take it down to the mechanic down the road or some dealership that or some franchise that does oil changes. You're probably going to take it to the place where they know how to do work on these cars. So now you're taking time and energy away from your day to do these things. Maintenance, oil changes, tire rotations, blades, scheduled maintenance on the vehicle itself, operational, fuel, repairs, insurance. These are all things that you're writing down as you go through the process. And what am I going to do once it's time to get rid of the vehicle? What is my resale? How many miles am I going to put on it? And then I look at the very last thing, which is my emotions. I am going to get a vehicle, but I want to make sure it looks good, that it feels great, and that it has some prestige. So this is the cookie cutter that I'm talking about when you're going to make those difficult decisions. And you can do this for a vehicle, for a house, who you're going to hire at the C-level, where you're going to, what location you're going to move your business. This is applicable to anything that requires a thought process. And this is the P2 mode that I'm talking about. And you use this in conjunction with your three-tier philosophy, making sure you're thinking critically, making sure that you think about the system, the big picture, and making sure that you think of an exit strategy long-term. So when you put all these things together and you go through the model, I do have a math model, you end up making what's called the right decision. And that is another day for another webinar, but the way that might look is in the P2 mode, you have what's called your base score, and you have cars A, B, C, and D. Once you go through the model and you get to this point, you plug these all into a mathematical model that I have that's really easy to follow. And in the end, you make a decision based on the score, whichever scores the highest, whether it's car A, B, C, or D. And if none of those scored higher than your base score, then what that means is that none of those options or alternatives are for you. But again, that's for another webinar, and it's a much longer process than I have time for today. So let me go ahead and conclude this and recap. How do we make decisions? Well, we make decisions based on our trifecta influencers, your needs, wants, and emotions. And we also use systems 1 and systems 2 thinking to make those decisions. Why do we make bad decisions? Well, the emotions get the best of us. Do we go with the burger or do we go with the fish? We have our surrogate emotions. We prime ourselves to believe we want something, we need something, but it's our emotions because of what we've done in the past that led us down the wrong path. And there's also that we don't recognize the implications of the decision we're making. We're not thinking long term. We don't understand the data because we didn't do enough research on the product or the decision. or we're not focused on the product because we're too busy watching a game or doing something else in between the decision making. And also, how to make better decisions. Well, you make better decisions by using the 3-tier philosophy. Stay in systems 2 thinking, critical thinking. Look at in systems thinking, get the big picture, and think long term. What is your exit strategy? And we also use what I call the P2 mode, which is what took me some time. And again, that's the crux of the book, I guess, is the parts, process, maintenance, operational, disposal, and emotions. Use this cookie cutter when you need to make those tough decisions, as opposed to letting the marketeers or the company who's selling you the vehicle tell you what you need. This whole process that I'm talking about, this framework and the book that I wrote, is all about you taking control of what you want, what is best for you, not what is best for your friend or for what people are looking at and seeing out there in the industry. So with that there, I am going to conclude and thank you again for all your time, and I'll turn it back on over to Malcolm.
Gerard, appreciate it, man. 2 questions here that have come up. The first one here, if you don't mind taking a couple, do you find emotion or a lack of information to be a larger cause for a poor decision? Like, which one is the bigger trigger in your estimation?
Well, I'm an emotional person. For me, it's always emotions, but it really depends. If you have the ability to control your emotions, or at least keep them in check, then it would be this latter one, which is where you don't have enough information and you don't do enough research. And that could be something that affects you. So again, it depends on the individual. For me, emotions is my culprit. It's the cross that I have to bear. But for others, it might be the other side, which is not enough information, not doing the research because of time or just being lazy.
Do you find that that's been a similar issue during, decisions during COVID, or has there been a different? Is it more of a lack of information? Has it changed the flaw that people have? Has it become more one than the other?
It's a good question. So, because of the research that I've done and the book that I read, a lot of the things that I heard in the news, I put into perspective, and I tried not to get my emotions involved. So, but if you allow the television, or not the television, but if you allow news broadcasts to tell you and make you feel a certain way, and again, it's very hard to do that because subconsciously they are telling you, whoever that news station may be, what's important to them. They are dictating to the society, this is what's important, which in actuality, if you do any research, if you're looking in the research on how many deaths there are so far many more deaths in other areas that aren't in the forefront of the media. But again, it's the media or the people, marketeers, and also who tell you this is what's most important. So that's why going through this P2 mode, using this process, could help you make those better decisions. It takes everything that's being shot at you and puts it into perspective.
Gotcha. Last question, and it's the obvious one. Where can folks get the book if they're interested?
Well, thank you for that question. You could go to my website. The book's going to be out in a couple of months. I just send it back to the editor. You could sign up on my website. I'm not going to send you any monthly, any monthly reports or anything. If you sign up, I'll give you access to some material that's not available unless you sign up, and I'll keep you informed when the book will come out. I'll just send out a mass mail saying, hey, the book is out. You could go to these places and get it.
Yeah. Well, Gerard, appreciate your time today. Appreciate the insight.